media in a country?
Yeah, so everything I tell you is going to be pretty much from a Western and a personal perspective, all right? So I do want viewers to keep that in mind. As a journalist, I try to keep things very balanced. That's the convention in which I was trained under, to try to be as balanced as possible with media. So I say that so that you remember that I'm taking this from a Western frame in which I grew up in media and have become a practitioner within that type of framework. So in the US, we think of media as the fourth pillar of democracy. As you know, we have the three branches of government: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. The executive represents the president. We have the legislature, which represents Congress and that legislative body. And then we have the judicial, which represents our court system. Well, who's checking those those three systems? Because those three systems were created to have a checks and balances system. But who's checking those systems that are supposed to be part of a check and balances system? And that's why media are considered the fourth pillar, because media are usually tasked with monitoring and sharing and holding those pillars within that system to account. Right? So if the president is failing at something or something needs work, media are questioning that president about it. If congressional members are not representing their districts very well or their particular respective areas, media are there to question them. It's a little bit tougher to question the Supreme Court, but you can question the legality behind some of their decision-making responsibilities. So at every part of those three tiers that make up the US government, which are supposed to be the checks and balances, media are there to question them. And it's important for media to be free and democratic so that everyone has an ability to have a voice. If there's a grievance within their community and they want lawmakers to address it, they have the ability to do that. Conversely, if media are controlled, then it's controlled by those who are the elites, those who have access to media, and those who might use their power of exclusivity in accessing the media against the will and the benefit of the majority of the people. So therefore, to have a free media, that allows the benefit of the people to have access to a voice, to talk about their concerns, to call attention to issues that are important to them.
Oh, thanks a lot, Doctor, for, I think I have a problem with my speaker. Can you hear me well, Doctor?
Yes, totally. I hear you very clearly.
That's good. Then I want to ask this question. Is there any role that media can play to liberate a country? If yes, what role should media play to help liberate a country like ours, Swaziland?
Yeah, so one of the important things about media, particularly in the 21st century, is to remember that we're in a digital age. Now, I know not everyone has access to some of the smartphone technologies or internet technologies, but at the same time, messaging can still be very basic and it can still be conventional by means of writing, typing, things like that. Now, of course, it's a lot easier if you have access to the internet. And why do I say this? Because when you have access to media and you point out how you want to share messaging and information, it shows that you might be covering or sharing information about issues that are not expressed or observed in the fore. What does that mean? If let's keep it really simple. Say there's a pothole in the road that everyone is complaining about, but it's not being addressed. You can use the power of media to call attention to that. And in many ways, you should. Could you write about it? Yes, you could. If you have a smartphone or something like that, can you take footage of it, share it to YouTube and make it more accessible so other people know what's happening? You can. There are other people who have started podcasts. Again, I know some of these technological barriers are there, but it doesn't mean that you need the internet just to share information and news about things that are important to you as an individual or to you as a community. People need representation, and sometimes the public attention helps to put pressure on those who are in power to make those changes. And that's why media are so important, because you put those actual pressures on congressmen, lawmakers, officials, police, to really do the right thing, or at least hold them to account when they're not doing the right thing.
Thank you for that, Doctor. I hope the people at home are learning a lot because we've got people from different media platforms here. Others are inboxing me. Zulu, thanks a lot for this. We are really learning a lot from Dr. Campbell. Sister Sue, do you have any questions?
I sure do. Thank you, Dr. Campbell. It just really, you really reinforcing that media is pivotal to any society, because they really are the ones that do the investigation and so forth. But on a side note, I would like to ask you some questions. Some of the questions that I have is, do you think there's a correlation between what the civil rights movement accomplished in comparison to Swazis wanting democracy?
Yeah, so we have to remember that during the civil rights movement, it was in the 1960s approximately at the zenith of the civil rights movement. You had a group of people within the United States, particularly Black Americans, who were facing various forms of oppression. That could mean access to the same things that white people, the dominant culture, had access to. That could mean anything from transportation to healthcare to job access. And all of these things were on the plate to be discussed. So the civil rights movement really catapulted the equal access and the equal representation and equal treatment to what was unfair before or more disparate before. Now, that's not to say that the United States is still a perfect place. It's not some utopia for people who feel marginalized or for non-white populations. But it was worse before the civil rights movement, if you follow what I'm saying. So you had people who marched, who sacrificed their lives in order to vote and have equal access to just being part of democracy. Before the civil rights movement, it was even more limited to be a part of democracy. And so that means that things that affected individuals were not being looked at by the government. They were ignored, or they were just diminished in comparison to the importance of some of the issues coming from the dominant culture. Once people are allowed to vote, they have a better say over what their position is in their lives, what government should be paying attention to. The civil rights movement helped to push that agenda, saying that Black people should be offered the same rights and the same access, particularly in the frame of democracy, as their white counterparts. And so that's where you saw huge movements across the nation for people wanting equal voting rights, for people wanting equal job access, equal health care, and just a better sense of self-determination instead of being controlled by the dominant power and leading and living a less experiential benefit of life, so to speak. So that's where you have a lot of people who sacrificed their time and their lives during the civil rights movement so they could have a better outlook on life and a better sense of self-determination. So that's, again, really why it's important for media to be involved in that, because it was really media that helped to change the landscape of what was happening. When say Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led marches, and you had even Bayard Rustin, who was assisting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and many others, Jesse Jackson, who you've heard of lately, who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., John Lewis, and many other luminaries and notables, so many to speak of. When you saw them marching and they were getting beaten or they had dogs sicked on them, if media had not been there, the world would not have seen some of the treatment that white people were imposing on the lives of Black people who just wanted equal rights. When media showed the video of some of those attacks, it started to call attention to it. People started to look more inwardly. People started to think, am I on the right side of justice? Am I doing the right thing? Am I living for some, under God the right way? Because some were looking at, just looking at their own conscience and their morals. Am I, standing on the right side of morality when I see people who are human just like me, being beaten and abused just for the right to vote, just for a chance to be a part of democracy. Media showed that. And that's where you started to see a change in some of the nature of people's attitudes, beliefs, and their actions of allowing for the progress of civil rights for Black Americans and many other marginalized communities and populations.
Wow, that's a brilliant answer. Do you have anything to say, Zulu? I just think if I can just say something regarding that, is I think I see such a correlation between what's going on in Swaziland with regards to we wanting democracy, although that was a race issue. Here, it's really again, I would say maybe a civil issue, because just as the African Americans in the United States didn't have rights, Swazis are pretty much going through the same thing. We don't have rights, and I think the majority of Swazis, maybe in the rural areas, don't really understand their rights because we've never experienced democracy. So I'm glad that we have a show like this so that people can hear, because knowledge is power, correct? So Zulu, do you have anything to say or comment with regards to that?
Siyabonga kakhulu Maswati amahle ukuthi nikhona. Siyacela ukuthi ni share. There's a question from one of our viewers here, Dr. Campbell. The question is, are you guys aware about what is happening in Swaziland? If yes, why are you not reporting about it? Because we've never seen you broadcasting about the things that are happening in Swaziland.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a mixed answer I'm going to give you. I am aware of it, but it's only because of movements like yours, people like Susan Belter, who really have talked about this, about what's happening, where I'm more aware of what's happening in Swaziland. There are a lot of people in America, and I would almost dare to say most people don't know what's happening in Swaziland right now. It's only because I have an interest in what's happening in a lot of the diasporic nations across Africa, across the Caribbean, that I am more aware, more sensitive to some of the political unrest that's happening in various countries, from Liberia to Haiti to, of course, Swaziland. But for the majority of Americans, they really don't even know that Swaziland exists. There are some people, unfortunately, who think that Africa is one country. They don't realize that it's a whole continent, that it could fit other continents within its landmass, and that Swaziland is a country within that continent. All right, so unfortunately, that's the reality of what people are aware of in America. Now, for those who also know what's happening in Swaziland, they may not be involved with media as much, so they wouldn't be able to air or to broadcast or to report on what's happening in Swaziland. One of the projects that I started recently is called Pan-African Report, and I plan, as I build this platform, to talk about some of these issues, what's happening in Swaziland and some of the political unrest that's happening there, some of the disparities that are happening in there, some of the oppression that the people feel and are experiencing in your country. So at least there'll be an additional voice for some of the atrocities and some of the inequitable treatment that's occurring. But you need many more. You need people like you to go out and talk about what's happening. You need your friends, your cousins, your brothers, your sisters, your moms, your dads, whoever is in a place of being able to share that information, to put it out there, to make people more aware. And as the voices grow louder, more attention is called to it, and then perhaps there will be more decisive and expedited change. Unless that happens, it will be very incremental, and a lot of people will be unaware. Lastly, I'll say, just to put things in perspective, we're heading into the end of the year. We're talking about rising prices and inflation on everything. If you think about it, a lot of people think about what's happening to their wallets and their pocketbooks. So again, that's where their number one attention is. It's not, Americans don't have that same global awareness that you may even find in Europe. Some of our media is very isolated, just talking about Western issues, American issues, what's happening at our borders, not even what's happening in the UK or France or Spain or Russia, for example. only if it's in reference to the Ukraine-Russia war. So again, awareness about what's happening in other countries can be very low here, and especially when it comes to issues like Africa, where those are usually an afterthought when talking about the global perspectives of socio-political information and news.
Wow, 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 Doctor. In fact, I wanted to ask you something like, what advice can you give to Swazi journalists on the issue of alerting you guys about what is happening in Swaziland? Because we know that there's power in our media platforms, but now people are wondering, how can we communicate with these guys? Because we know your countries are so powerful. If you can intervene, we can get our democracy as soon as tomorrow. So what advice can you give to Swazi journalists to collaborate with you guys so that you can start reporting about what is happening in Swaziland?
Your sound was just clipped at the end there, but I think your main point was, what can Swazi journalists do? And that is to write. One of the basic fundamental responsibilities of journalists is to tell a story. What is happening there? How can you put that into perspective so that other people can understand what's happening? If someone is living on, $1 a day and they can't feed their family, talk about those stories. If someone was killed by perhaps a member of the police force unjustly because they were standing there or speaking in opposition and they were just killed summarily, talk about those issues. No one is going to know about them unless they are discussed, unless stories are being told. And then when you share those stories, try to reach out to people in the US. You can reach out to me if you'd like. I'm at panafricanreport@gmail.com. If you have some stories that you would like to share and that we can talk about and that we can discuss, that I could even put on the website or to tweet about, let me know at panafricanreport@gmail.com. If you can reach out to other journalists who might be doing other things, there are other media platforms out there on YouTube, for example. I believe another one is Pan-African Diaspora News Channel. If you look on YouTube, if you look them up online, you should be able to find some other outlets and other journalists who would be willing to take on your stories and willing to share what's happening. And then you could also reach out to US lawmakers, particularly those who have ties to African interests. As we know, the US is looking to build trade and relations with various countries in Africa. Reach out to those lawmakers who might be more sensitive to those issues. And you have to be persistent. It can't just be one story in the month of October and then you check back 6 months from now. Try to do it every day or several times a week. This is something you're passionate about. This is something that affects your life and the lives of those who you love, who you care about. Treat it as such and be persistent. Keep telling those stories. Reach out to people who might be influential in Swaziland, but also in Western countries, including the United States. And you have to be not just persistent, but also consistent. Keep it going, all right? And eventually you'll start to see change.
Oh. Thanks a lot, Dr. Sister Sue, do you have something? Balalele Makaya, Nitanvulela, because I know I did read your messages. I saw people saying, yeah, Sulu, please open the lines for us. We want to talk to Dr. Campbell. Yeah, people are so eager to talk to you, Doctor. Then I'll open the lines after Sister Sue has posed a question to you. Our viewers at home, you'll be able to call us through WhatsApp on this number, +277767206 I repeat, +277767206 Sister Sue, do you have any question before we can take in calls?
Yes, Zulu, I do. So Dr. Campbell, some of these questions were posed by actual Swazi citizens living in Swaziland. I asked them for a number of questions, and this is one of them. So please explain the concept of the population choosing a government through regular, free, and fair elections.
So that is a system that was developed during the recreation of the United States and post-colonial United States. So again, we have to keep in mind that the US democracy is about 240 years old. I think this year might make 239 years. Next year will make 240. And democracy was established after the Revolutionary War. And we, excuse me, not we, but the founders of this country, the early Europeans who came and settled here, were escaping and leaving the monarchy of which we know was in Great Britain. So they had more of a monarchy, they had more of that feudal, almost like a contemporary feudal system, and the colonists were leaving that system and trying to create a new system where people would be more represented in the US and in their communities and their homes. Now, what the US has is really a representative democracy. There are different types of democracy. The US is not a direct democracy. What is a direct democracy? That means every person has a vote, every person has a voice. So if you're in a community of, say, 1,000 people and you needed a water tower put in so more people could have access to clean, healthy water, should we get the water tower or not? It would be very expensive if we did, but if we did get it, more people would have access to water. We need this town or this community of 1,000 people to vote on this issue if we should get the water tower or not. So every person of that 1,000 member community would vote on whether or not they should get the water tower. That's a direct democracy. We have more of a representative democracy. Because we have such a large population, we have representatives that vote on issues for each state and various communities. So let's take the state of Virginia, for example. It's broken up into various sectors. In each of those sectors, they have House members remember we talked about the three branches of government, one of them being Congress. Congress is a bicameral system, meaning has two systems. One is the House of Representatives, the other is the US Senate. In the state of Virginia, it's broken up into several areas. Each of those areas is represented by different members of the House, okay? And then the whole state is represented by two representatives in the US Senate. Okay, so yes, if you're thinking, well, if there are 50 US states, then there are 100 representatives from the Senate. Yes, that's true. And there are 435, I believe, in the House of Representatives. Okay, so when there's an issue that needs to be discussed or voted on a federal level, those representatives in the House and the Senate vote on the issues for Virginians as a whole. And those politicians in the Congress, which again make up the House and the Senate, represent the interests of Virginia as a whole. And that happens for each of the United States. And that's why we are a representative democracy, or some would describe us as a democratic republic, all right, where you have the majority control over the machinations and the operations of a particular state or group of people. So in Swaziland, you could use the US as a model as to how democracy could be developed. There are other instances of democracies around the world as well. You have democracy in UK, you have it in Germany. They have a parliamentary system where they can form coalitions. We don't have that in the United States as much. So there are different aspects of democracy, and I think that the people of Swaziland would really have to better determine what would work best for them. What the ancient Greeks did was they had more of a direct democracy at first. And I do want to note, because of this program, that you may hear that democracy came from Greece. There are studies that show it did not. It actually originated in Africa. So democracy is an African thing. They trace it back to Egypt, where Solos would travel to Egypt to learn about some of the laws, the policies, the mathematics, and science that were already in Egypt before they got to Greece. So I do want to point that out, that democracy is actually an African thing. Okay, and what the people of Swaziland would need to do is find out what would work best for them. The Athenians, when they were looking at democracy and trying to establish democracy in Greece, were using a direct democracy. It worked for a while, maybe a couple centuries, but then it started to fall apart because their population got very big, and then they realized maybe this wasn't the best idea. And then that's where representative democracy started to evolve from that failed model of a direct democracy, because you just actually have too many people. And sometimes when you have a direct democracy, the will of the majority might benefit them, but it might come to the exploitation of the minority. Let's take, for example, the US. If the US was a direct democracy back during when we had slavery, it might have actually worked better for slaves because there were so many in the South. What the white Americans did was they said, well, if you're an enslaved African, if you're a Black American, you're not really given the full vote. We'll count you as basically 3/5 of a person, and then you are issued 3/5 of a vote, basically. It was a really misappropriated and just a very unfair system because of the population, but it did maintain white control. And that's sort of where we are today in representative democracy. So you can see that there are deficiencies in various models of democracy, but it's still better than an autocracy or a dictator or just a monarchy. You still have the voices of the people. Eventually, even if it's incremental, even if it's glacial, it'll eventually work to the benefit of the people.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think every system will have its flaws, but I think if you've lived under a dictatorship for many years, I think anything would be better than a monarchy system. Absolutely. But Zulu, do you want to open the lines for Dr. Campbell?
Yeah, mbukeli lapha ekhaya ngifuna ukukuvulela ushaye ngiyacela ukuthi ushaye uzokhuluma nadokotela mhlawumbe nawe ungathiwa sowudive emsakatweni lemikhulu lapha so yabona. But before we can take calls, Doctor, we've got our apostle here, Apostle Makubu. He wants to ask you a question. Apostle, you can pose a question to Doctor.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you very much, my sister, comrade, just to give us this opportunity to go international as it was a democratic news. So my question, Doctor, as maybe you got some elaboration about what is happening in this country, Eswatini. Since you are someone who is versed in the knowledge of journalism and in a democratic country, my question is: since now we are in the dangerous terrain as a country, while we are looking forward to get our democracy, how can you contribute as a journalist? Because we believe that when our stories as the country is going forth to such countries like where you are, we believe that people, as they know what is going on in Swaziland, there are some sudden steps, because I strongly believe that they believe in you, that whatever you said, it is true about other countries.
Yeah, maybe to add on what the Apostle is asking, Doctor, according to the experience you have in journalism, is there anything that Washington, D.C. can do, help Eswatini to get democracy?
Yeah, I think that there, over time, or depending on the importance of the issue, we have seen the U.S. government work to try to change the governments of other countries. Sometimes it's by force, sometimes it's through sanctioning. It really depends on the severity of the situation, the attention that the US government wants to give it, who's at the head of the government at the time. There are a lot of different elements where the US can modify or influence the structure of another country's government. But before it gets to that point, there needs to be the explanation or the understanding or the observance for the need for the US to do that. Now, I don't want it to come off the wrong way, but the US and Swaziland relations, at least from how I understand it so far, and I could be wrong on this, aren't as strong as with other countries, right? The US is looking at so many other countries around the world that it has stronger partnerships with or alliances with. And then even in Africa, it has stronger alliances and partnerships with other countries, such as Ghana or Kenya or even Nigeria, for example, because of some of the resources that those countries have or that they export. And again, I'm not saying that's fair, but I'm just trying to present the reality of what's going on. So that's why you're not hearing a lot of the US response to what's happening in Swaziland. You're not hearing a lot of politicians talk about it. And again, the only way that you're going to get US politicians to pay attention to this issue is if they know what's going on. The only way for them to know what's going on is from those who are there experiencing some of these disparities to talk about them, to share them, make them known to the world. And I know that's not going to be the easiest thing to do. There are going to be restrictions there. There are going to be blocks of access. But we see in other countries that if the persistence and the will is there, it will happen. Most recently, if we look at Iran, for example, where they had the death of the young woman in the hands of authorities, there were reports of media blackouts where they would shut off the internet or restrict access. But those voices still came out because you had people who were still tweeting, still writing, still trying to reach out to people outside of the country to let them know what's going on and how urgent the situation was. And we've seen this happen in other countries. We saw it during the Arab Spring, for example, when we had unrest in Egypt, where you had media blackouts and still messaging came out. So again, you have to be consistently persistent when it comes to media. And I'll say that again, you have to be consistently persistent, telling the stories of those who don't have the voice to do so and making it known of some of the issues that are going on in Swaziland, Eswatini.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Campbell and Sister Sue. And another thing, maybe if I can, because now I strongly believe that as journalists, if ever you were just proximate to our country, you can just see that there are many news that we can write. I don't know whether, because now I think through our sister, we have got an opportunity now to push our democracy into a greater exploit, so that maybe in America, you know what is going on in Swaziland. Can you be a journalist to this media? Because it's one of the media that have got a lot of followers, especially in this country. And I strongly believe that it's the leading media when it comes to the audience. So if ever, it's just a plea, because where we are now, we are in the midst, and we've got a lot of stories that we can just relate to you as the people of Swaziland, the way things are growing tough, people are killed, and things are taking lands, and students are committing suicide, and education is just, it's dead. A lot of things that are happening. But I strongly believe that as a journalist, you can do something for us. Maybe it's just a plea, or I don't know what to say, but if ever you can just help us to, we don't say that we need money and also, but we know that as you are our mouthpiece in that, people will just locate, because we are just a very minuscule country, but there's a lot that is going on in Southern Africa.
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I believe.
Yeah, definitely. And again, anyone can reach out to me at panafricanreport@gmail.com. I also have a webpage on Facebook called Pan African Report. I believe I'm also on Twitter, and there might also be an Instagram page, but it's, again, Pan African Report. Report, and it's a growing platform. You may go to the website and say, okay, there's not a whole lot here. It's more of an aggregator site for now, but there will be more content coming up. And yes, definitely reach out to me. But again, don't just reach out to me. I'm just one person in a world of billions of people, right? So again, you want an amplified voice. You want an amplified voice to what's happening in Swaziland. I'm just one person. That's why broadcasting was so effective. Without going back into a media lesson, there was something called narrowcasting before there was broadcasting, broad. So when you're sending a message, you send it to a lot of people at the same time, right? And now we have digital means of sharing those types of information. So there's broadcasting even through the digital platform space, not just the electronic, okay? So if you're just talking to me, that's narrowcasting. That's not the right way to go about it because it's just me. But if you're broadcasting, you're sending it to a large group of people, it's an amplified voice. Each of those people that receive your message can then send it on to many other people. And as you can see, that rhizomatic type of connection and amplified voice can be more constructive and more productive.
Okay.
Oh, thanks a lot, Dr. Thanks a lot for the positive response.
Sure.
And now I want to open the lines for our viewers at home to call. Masotla mahle ngiyanvulela ke manje sengiyashaya. Ngiyacabanga ukuthi ma politicians ethu evile ukuthi Dr. Campbell said that for them to intervene in our situation, we need to make them know about what is happening in the country. That is key, Apostle. Yeah. We need to make other countries know about what is happening in our country. Let's not expect miracles to happen, but let us take steps. Let us go to Washington, D.C. Let us contact those journalists. He has just given us his email address. Let us keep on pushing. Remember, he said, oh, let us take this first caller, Doctor, before we can close to Sister Sue. Swaziland Democratic News, Party Inside.
Greeting with your team and greeting to Sister Sue and Dr. Campbell.
Yes, my leader.
I would like to thank Dr. Campbell for enlightening us about the role being played by media in the struggle. So I've only got two questions. I want to ask what role is being played by media to delay the struggle in the country? I want to know how do you know for sure that the media is captured? Thank you.
I don't know if you did get the questions, Doctor.
I was a little shaky. He asked, how do I know the media is what?
Captured.
It's captured in the struggle.
Captured?
Yes. While the struggle is while we are in the ongoing of the struggle, but only to find that a certain media is being captured. How do you know?
Oh, you mean, okay. And when you say captured, do you mean physically captured, like journalists are being physically captured? Or do you mean that people are receiving the message and capturing the message of what's coming out of the media reporting?
Yes. No, by captured, we mean that maybe someone has paid you some money not to report bad things about him. That person, by giving you money, is capturing you.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, yeah, almost like a bribe or something like that.
Yes, a bribe. That's correct.
I understand now. Okay, yeah. That can be somewhat hard to do. Okay, so let's take an individual reporter, for example. When you see one reporter and they are reporting on certain types of news, do they report both sides? Are they accurate in their reporting? Do they only speak to a certain limited number of sources? Do they talk about how they came upon the particular story? What is the type of narrative that they continually talk about? If they say release 5 stories a week, Monday through Friday, and they have a story, and it's the same kind of angle all the time, you could tell that they have a certain slant or a certain bias. How do you know if they're getting paid for it? That's more difficult. You would have to ask them almost directly if they are getting paid or financed through one particular person. If they are more balanced in their reporting, chances are no one's paying them directly. But if they are being paid directly by one source, they usually tend to not talk about that source of where they're getting their money or that source of where they possibly could be getting their money. It's always portrayed or reported about in a positive way, and despite what you may know to be some inadequacies or some foibles or some things that they are not doing properly. So it might be a little bit difficult. Here in the US, we do have corporate media. And that means that we do have certain business interests that fund our media. Everyone who understands what media is like knows this, but we still follow it because it's so easily accessible. When we turn on CNN, when we turn on Fox News, when we turn on MSNBC, we understand that those are financed by corporations. Each of those corporations and the shareholders of those corporations have an interest in the messaging that's being put out there. So they have their own particular biases. We also have something called National Public Radio, and we have public television, public broadcasting service. That's something that's more funded by public funds. And so they have more balanced news. It's not as flashy and it's not as pretty as some of the corporate media, but they usually talk about the issues of coming from marginalized communities, coming from those areas and people that are adversely affected by flawed policies in government. And so sometimes you really have to do the research to find out where somebody is getting their funding. If usually a reporter works through a company, where does that company get its funding from? Who are their sponsors? Who are their shareholders? That can give you an idea of where that money is coming from. But because Swaziland has a different, or Eswatini has a different format than our media here, and in the way that it's put forth or the way it's controlled, it's a little bit difficult for me to say with absolute certainty how you can find out if the reporter is corrupted, if there is some type of, like again, corruption going on, some type of bribery happening when it comes to how that reporter is sharing news and information.
Thanks a lot, Doctor. We've got another caller on the line. Caller, you are Pagati inside.
Zulu Makeba, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the question from Dr. Campbell.
Sure.
Dr. Campbell, please help me here. There is this thing, how can the media help us in a way, like, we need access to first on the number or on the percentage of people in Swaziland who are vouching for the people system for the Democrats. We need, I think, we need that statistical data and that statistical facts on those bases so that we can really know how much of the people that are in Swaziland and respecting who really are for the Democrats, and how can the media work out, and how can the media have an impact in voicing out exactly how much of the people that need this democracy and or influence in the in this country in the moment. How much can it have? How much of an impact can it have?
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, my brother. We got your question. Let's take this other caller. Swaziland Democratic News, Pagati inside.
Yes, good evening, Makeba.
Yes, how are you, Diaspora?
Apostle Makobo, Dr. Campbell,
Yes.
Yeah, I will first ask the question.
My leader, can you please fix your line? I think there's an external noise coming from your side.
How about now? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I think it's better now.
Okay, I will first answer the comrade who asked about captured media. It's a clear one. If a media is captured, it's like the media in Swaziland. The Times of Swaziland, the Swatini Service, Swatini Television. They don't report anything which is bad done by the security forces and the king. So that media is captured. You can see by that. They cannot report what is really happening. like the killing of the people, throwing gas on the bus. They didn't publish that because they are captured. Thank you.
Okay.
Let me pass. So a quick question to Dr. Campbell. There is a narrative here which if you want to report, like, let me say, I want to inform you about what's happening in Swaziland. There's the notion of like, who am I to defy out media houses because I'm not an individual. It has to be a group of people and it has a certain significance in Swaziland. Like you are a political party, even though political parties are bad in Swaziland, but you can't go and report as an individual. Is that true?
Dr. Campbell, did you get a question?
Not quite, not quite. I heard the part about political parties being subpar, and it's difficult sometimes, I think, to connect with a political party, but I didn't hear the actual question.
Can you repeat the question, my leader?
The question, Doctor, is can I report what's happening in Swaziland as an individual, or I have to affiliate in a certain media house or a political party?
Oh, yeah, now I think we got it well. Did you get it, Doctor? She's asking whether is it possible for an individual to report what is happening in the country, or we need an organization? Please note that question because there are other callers on the line. I want to put them in, then you attend to the questions.
Sure, sure. I'll answer it really quickly, though, but it is, you know, if you have access to do it individually, that's the best. Do it individually. But then you basically you want to put out and have access to as many voices as possible. Even if yours is the sole voice, the only voice, start there. So if you have access and the means and the ability to talk about what's happening, start there. Get on the internet, spread pamphlets, organize with other people within your community. And then you guys can work together to help spread an amplified voice, maybe speaking through an organization, maybe speaking through a political party, maybe speaking through a lawmaker or a politician in your area. But it starts with you is really where it starts.
No, that's very loud and clear, Doctor. Let's hear from this caller. Swaziland Democratic News Party inside.
Good evening, Mageva and your team, and good evening to Dr. Campbell.
Good evening, leader.
Yes, my question pertains to the media and to the use of the media in as far as enlightening the international community in cases where you find that our leaders, especially now, the current leaders we have that are trying by all means to avoid democratic reforms in Swaziland. So what they do is they go to the international community, especially like, for example, in the recent United Nations General Assembly. So they paint a picture that does not exist about our country. They tell you that investment is good. They tell you that everything is fine. You can come to Swaziland. Yet they know that they are going to suppress the masses to kind of like enforce that. So then what role can the media play to try and enlighten the international community about the fact that, no, that's not the case. If people protest in Swaziland, they are gunned down, some of them, and they are always suppressed. How can the media enlighten you to the fact that, no, it's like the fact that the reason why most of the time the government will be going out to fish out investors to come in, not particularly because of a purely economic interest, but it's because of how they affected the economy to try and reach a certain individual and reach a certain group, like maybe a light or political group. As such, then the masses will always get less, the masses will always be available for cheap labor, the masses will always be available for exploitation. So my question is just along those lines, that how can the media and anybody who has at least some information go to the international community, especially to try and engage platforms such as the UN General Assembly, because in as much as probably they'll treat the country as a sovereign state, but they still have the right to know that that is not true. And that's a lie that's being told about the country, because it still endangers the investors. What if that failed to suppress the masses one day? Thank you, Makeva.
Sure,
thanks a lot, leader.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Really, it comes down to creating your own spaces and platforms. let me speak about this from a personal or from a U.S. angle, as I said I would do before. If there are issues like, say, we have a city in the U.S., it's called Jackson, Mississippi, okay? They have had tainted water, okay? They can't drink their water. But because of corporate media and the attention that's being paid to other issues, the death of Queen Elizabeth, the upcoming monarchy with King Charles III, the war in Ukraine and, with Russia, other issues are usually at the head of the queue when it comes to topical information. You have people on the ground in Jackson, Mississippi, who are reaching out to reporters and saying, you need to talk about this. Or they're creating their own spaces in which to do it. They're creating their own blogs. They are taking their cell phone cameras and they're posting it to YouTube. And they're creating spaces where people have access to understand and observe and view firsthand, or actually secondhand, what's happening on the ground in Jackson, Mississippi. Again, calling attention to issues that are unequal in Swaziland will need to be a multi-tiered approach. Media, of course, is one, but organization through different foundations or organizations of people is another. Protesting is very helpful in times like these. Very often in front of the White House, you'll see groups of people from various countries protesting about problems that are happening in their home country. I've really never seen anyone from Eswatini or from Swaziland out there. That's not to say that they haven't been there, but again, it hasn't been to a level of frequency or a large number where you would know that there is something happening that is not right or that is unequal in Swaziland. So you have to mobilize people to help get out that attention. Mobilizing people to speak to media is one part, but also protesting and speaking to other lawmakers in various countries, not just the US, but and maybe in the UK or other countries that may have a stake in what's happening in Swaziland, to really understand the severity of the conditions there, what people are experiencing, and the pain that people are living in their daily lives. If people don't know about it, particularly people who are influential, they're not going to discuss it. They're not going to make moves on it. And because, like what was alluded to before, Swaziland is such a small country, they often would get passed over for other issues that are taking a level of topical precedence in the news cycle. So you need to get those voices out there. Each person, if they could start to write about it somehow or post a video on YouTube, even if it's with their cell phone, and say, hey, look at what's happening in my community. We don't have clean water, we don't have food, or we don't have various things to just improve the quality of life. Somebody was just killed for no reason. They were standing on the corner and they were targeted and killed. Those are things that need to be put out there. Post them to YouTube, write about them, reach out to lawmakers, and even in the US who, if you look online, maybe they have affiliations with African countries and some of the outreach that they do. I do remember there's a lawmaker, I believe her name was Karen Bass. She was one. Now, I don't know if she still does. That's why I didn't say her name earlier. But if you look online, there may be lawmakers and politicians that usually, or that have some type of have performed some type of overture, or do look at Africa and various countries in Africa as a potential partner, as a way to outreach. Those are the politicians who you want to speak to first. But it's contingent, I believe, upon each person to try to do their part to bring those voices out, to make them known, and to expose some of the issues and problems that are happening in Eswatini, Swaziland.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Sister Sue. Sicela uvalelise usho longafisa kusho eMaswatini.
I'd just like to say thank you, Dr. Campbell, especially for your whole time. We really appreciate it. I'm sure the Swazi people appreciate it as well. I just did want to comment on the last question, and I think you hit the nail on the head with the answer that you gave. I 100% agree with what you said, subscribing to all platforms of media. You also yourself as individuals, we need to be a voice. Now, I have to comment. I mean, it's not most probably as bad, and let you know, Dr. Campbell, that many people in Swaziland, just because of the fear of there's no, how can I say, freedom of speech is pretty much illegal. So people can even go on Facebook with fake accounts and really say whatever they need to say, publicize it, share it. I'm sure lots of people have friends in Great Britain and so forth. For an example, the issue with the speech that was made at the United Nations, I thought that was actually all lies. None of it was really the real depth of the truth of what's happening in Swaziland. And I think that all media, we need to subscribe to all media platforms and comment and blog, just like Dr. Campbell was saying, and let the outside community or the world know that none of that is actually true. In fact, the disparities in Swaziland are deplorable at this time. And I think that the current government says it so that they can get investments to come into the country. But I do appreciate your time letting us know about democracy. I like Zulu said, we certainly would love to have you come back on the Swaziland Democratic News platform. I think we actually need more time with you to educate, mobilize, inform, equip, because knowledge is power. So we do appreciate that. Maswatla mahle siyanibonga namhla ukuthi nivule ema line enu nibukele Dr. Campbell. Ngiyathemba ukuthi nifundzele okunengi namhla. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Campbell.
I just did want to add one more thing, if I could. Reaching out to organizations that talk about these issues like Amnesty International, Human Rights Commission, try to reach out, and there are lists of them online. Try to reach out to organizations that pay attention to human rights abuses in various countries. And again, be consistently persistent. Just sending one story or one email isn't going to do it. You almost have to make it into an avocation or a part-time job, or whenever you have free time, keep reaching out to people and tell other people to reach out to them too. With amplified voices, change can happen.
Yes, I agree. Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell, for that. So if there's any political leaders which are watching right now, I would strongly, if they haven't done it, is reach out to Amnesty International and write letters and get signatures and make phone calls and emails and so forth. So that would be a great start. I think they might have done it by now. But Zulu, do you have anything else to say? Zulu Makeba.
Oh yes, Sister Sue.